The gun felt heavy in Ray's hand as he leveled it at Marcus's face. The midday sun beat down on both men standing in the empty parking lot behind the liquor store, creating harsh shadows that matched the moment's severity. A bead of sweat rolled down Ray's temple, but his grip remained steady. "You really think this is justice?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite staring down the barrel. His expensive watch gleamed in the sunlight as he slowly raised his hands. Ray's cold blue eyes narrowed. "I don't care what it is." The gunshot echoed across the lot, scattering birds from a nearby tree. The sound bounced off the surrounding buildings, amplifying it like a thunderclap. Marcus's body jerked backward, his expression shifting from defiance to shock in an instant. He crumpled to the ground, a look of disbelief forever frozen on his face. Ray watched as a small trickle of blood made its way across the cracked asphalt, snaking around pebbles and filling the tiny fissures in the pavement. He felt nothing, no regret, no satisfaction, just a strange emptiness that had been his companion for years. The moment that should have been cathartic, that should have released years of built-up rage, instead left him hollow. Ray studied Marcus's still form with clinical detachment, as if observing a stranger sleeping on a park bench. He tucked the gun into his waistband, pulled his shirt down over it, and glanced around to confirm no witnesses. The liquor store wouldn't open for hours, and this far corner of the lot was hidden from the street by a dumpster and a row of scraggly bushes. Ray walked unhurriedly to his truck, the keys jingling in his pocket, sounding unnaturally loud in the silence that followed the gunshot. As Ray drove away, he thought about stopping for coffee. It was still early, after all. The digital clock on his dashboard read 7:13 a.m., a normal Tuesday morning for the rest of Millfield. Not for Marcus Walsh, though, and not for Ray, though he didn't fully comprehend that yet. 36 hours earlier. The rusty nail was never quiet on Friday nights, but this particular evening had an energy that set Ray's teeth on edge. Maybe it was the group of college kids commandeering the pool table, their expensive shoes and branded clothes marking them as outsiders from the university 30 miles away. Maybe it was the new bartender who couldn't mix a proper whiskey sour, diluting the bourbon with too much lemon juice and not enough bitters. Or maybe it was just that Ray had been on edge for months now, ever since the eviction notice had appeared on his door, informing him that the building had been sold and would be repurposed for community improvement. The neon beer signs cast a sickly blue glow across the worn wooden bar top, where Ray sat hunched over his drink. Country music played from the jukebox in the corner, some song about lost love and hard times that felt too on the nose for Ray's current situation. In another life, he might have found it funny. "Another," Ray said, sliding his empty glass across the bar. The bartender, Jimmy, according to his name tag, looked hesitant. "Maybe slow down a bit? You've had 4 already." Ray stared at him until the younger man looked away. "Another?" Jimmy sighed and poured the drink. Ray knocked it back in one go, feeling the familiar burn. It wasn't doing its job tonight. The alcohol used to numb him, used to make the world less sharp and painful. These days, it just made him mean. That's when Marcus Walsh walked in. Ray knew Marcus by reputation. Everyone in Millfield did. The man had made a fortune in construction, buying up half the town's properties during the recession 10 years ago. Now he was developing luxury condos where family businesses once stood. Ray's own father's auto shop had been one of the casualties. Marcus took a seat at the far end of the bar, flanked by 2 men in suits. The trio stood out in the working-class establishment, their expensive clothes and loud conversation drawing stares from the regulars. Ray watched as Marcus ordered a round of top-shelf bourbon, laughing about something with his companions. Something dark and bitter churned in Ray's gut. "You know that guy?" Jimmy asked, noticing Ray's fixed gaze. "Everyone knows Marcus Walsh," Ray replied. "He's the man who's pricing everyone out of their homes. I heard he's bringing jobs to the area with that new development." Ray snorted. Minimum wage jobs, replacing businesses that supported families for generations, some trade. As the night wore on, Ray's mood darkened with each drink. Marcus grew louder, his laughter cutting through the bar's ambient noise like nails on a chalkboard. When Marcus bumped into Ray on his way to the bathroom, not even bothering with an apology, Something snapped. "Watch where you're going," Ray growled. Marcus turned, eyebrows raised in mild surprise as if he hadn't even noticed the collision. "Excuse me." I said, "Watch where you're going. Some of us are just trying to have a quiet drink." A flicker of amusement crossed Marcus's face. "Doesn't look like you've been having a drink. Looks more like several." The bar seemed to quiet around them, conversations dying as patrons sensed the brewing confrontation. "You think you're better than everyone here?" Ray said, standing now. He was a good 3 inches taller than Marcus and used it to his advantage. "I think you're drunk and looking for trouble," Marcus replied calmly. "And I think you should sit down before you embarrass yourself." "You're the embarrassment," Ray spat. "Coming in here like you own the place." He stepped closer. "Oh wait, you probably do own it. Planning to tear it down too? Build some more overpriced apartments nobody who actually lives here can afford." Marcus's composed demeanor slipped slightly. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about. My dad worked his whole life building his shop. Then the bank forecloses after 1 bad year, and suddenly you own it. Funny how that works out." Recognition dawned in Marcus's eyes. "You're Tom Garner's boy." "Ray," he corrected, voice tight. "And my father's name was Raymond, not Tom." "Right, Ray," Marcus said, his tone patronizing. "Look, business is business. Your father made his choices, and I made mine." Something red and violent flashed behind Ray's eyes. His fist connected with Marcus's jaw before he even realized he'd thrown a punch. The developer stumbled backward, catching himself on a bar stool as his companions rushed forward. What followed was a blur of fists and shouting. Ray felt hands grabbing him, pulling him away. Jimmy was yelling about calling the cops. Marcus was touching his split lip, staring at Ray with a mixture of shock and disgust. "You're finished in this town," Marcus said, as his friends ushered him toward the door. "You hear me? Finished." Ray lunged again, but was held back by 2 patrons. "You already finished me," he shouted after Marcus. "You finished all of us." Jimmy banned Ray from the bar that night, telling him not to come back until he sobered up and apologized. Ray spent the rest of the evening driving around town, his knuckles throbbing, replaying the confrontation in his mind. Each time, in his imagination, he did more than just punch Marcus Walsh, much more. Ray woke the next morning with a pounding headache and fractured memories of the previous night. The shame came in waves as he remembered the altercation at the bar. He wasn't usually a violent man, at least. He hadn't been before life had ground him down. Sunlight streamed through the threadbare curtains of his bedroom, illuminating dust particles floating in the air. His knuckles throbbed, and when he examined them, he saw they were swollen and bruised. The skin had split over 2 knuckles on his right hand. He flexed his fingers, wincing at the pain. A glance at the nightstand revealed an empty whiskey bottle. Ray didn't remember finishing it, but that wasn't surprising. There were a lot of things he didn't remember these days. The apartment was small, 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, and a bathroom with perpetually lukewarm water. The walls were thin enough that he could hear his neighbor's television through them. Some game show with an overly enthusiastic host. On the dresser sat a framed photograph of Ray and his father standing in front of Garner's auto shop, both men grinning proudly in grease-stained coveralls. It was taken 10 years ago, before the recession, before the heart attack, before everything fell apart. After his father died and they lost the shop, Ray had drifted. Construction jobs here and there, some mechanic work when he could find it. Nothing stable. He'd moved into this small apartment above what used to be the town's hardware store, now closed thanks to the big box store on the edge of town. Another casualty of progress. The irony wasn't lost on Ray that he now lived above a failed business, watching as his own life followed a similar trajectory. He showered and dressed mechanically, trying to piece together exactly what he'd said to Marcus. He remembered the punch clearly, the satisfying crack of knuckles against jaw, but the words were a jumble. Ray's phone buzzed with a text from his boss. "Don't bother coming in today. Or tomorrow. Take the week off." News traveled fast in Millfield. Ray threw the phone onto his bed and cursed. He couldn't afford to lose shifts. The rent was already 2 weeks late. Fueled by hunger and anger, Ray headed out to grab breakfast. The diner down the street served the cheapest eggs in town. As he walked, a familiar black SUV pulled up alongside him. The window rolled down to reveal Marcus Walsh's face, the left side sporting an impressive bruise. "Get in," Marcus said. It wasn't a request. Ray considered walking away, but curiosity got the better of him. He climbed into the passenger seat, immediately aware of how out of place he looked in the luxury vehicle, with its leather seats and new car smell. "What do you want?" Ray asked. Marcus pulled away from the curb. "To talk, like adults." They drove in silence for several minutes, heading toward the outskirts of town. Ray noticed they were alone in the Carno bodyguards today. "Where are your friends?" Ray asked. "This is between you and me," Marcus replied. "No need for an audience." They pulled into the parking lot behind Grayson's liquor store, a place that did most of its business after dark. At this hour, it was deserted. Marcus put the car in park, but left the engine running. "I looked you up after our encounter last night. Raymond Garner, Jr., 32 years old. 2 arrests for disorderly conduct. 1 DUI. Currently working for Wilson Construction as a day laborer." He turned to face Ray. "Not exactly living up to your potential, are you?" Ray clenched his jaw. "Did you bring me here to insult me?" "I brought you here to understand you. Your father and I had history. Did you know that?" "What are you talking about?" "Raymond Sr. and I were partners once, back when I was just starting out. He had the chance to invest in my first development. Could have made a fortune. But he backed out at the last minute, said it didn't feel right to displace the families living there." Marcus shook his head. "Sentimental fool." Ray felt his anger rising again. "Don't talk about my father like that. The truth hurts, doesn't it? Your father chose principles over prosperity. And look where it got him, dead from a heart attack at 62, his business foreclosed, his son working dead-end jobs and starting bar fights." "Shut up," Ray said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I tried to help him, you know, when the shop was failing, offered to buy him out at a fair price. He refused, said he'd rather go bankrupt than sell to me." Marcus laughed mirthlessly. "And that's exactly what happened." "You're lying." "Am I?" "Ask Betty down at the bank. She handled the paperwork." Marcus turned fully toward Ray now. "Your father chose to be a martyr. And now you're following in his footsteps, blaming me for your own failures." Something broke inside Ray. All the accumulated rage, the years of struggle, the humiliation of watching his father's legacy crumble crystallized into a single, clarifying moment of hatred. "Get out of the car," Ray said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "Get out of the car." Perhaps it was the deadly calm in Ray's voice, or maybe Marcus thought he could reason with him in the open air. Either way, he complied, stepping out into the empty parking lot. Ray followed. "You think this is about money?" Ray asked, advancing on Marcus. "You think I care about what could have been? This is about respect. My father built something real. He contributed to this town. What do you build? Overpriced condos no one can afford. You destroy communities for profit and call it progress." Marcus sighed, looking genuinely disappointed. "I create jobs. I bring investment. I move this town forward while people like you and your father cling to the past." He shook his head. "You're a dinosaur, Ray, and we both know what happened to them." Ray reached behind his back and pulled out the gun he always kept tucked in his waistband, a habit from years of working in rough neighborhoods. He hadn't planned this, hadn't woken up thinking today would be the day he'd kill a man. But in that moment, it felt inevitable, like the conclusion to a story long in the writing. The gun felt heavy in Ray's hand as he leveled it at Marcus's face. The midday sun beat down on both men standing in the empty parking lot, creating harsh shadows that matched the moment's severity. "You really think this is justice?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite staring down the barrel. Ray's cold blue eyes narrowed. "I don't care what it is." The gunshot echoed across the lot. Marcus crumpled to the ground, a look of disbelief forever frozen on his face. Ray watched as a small trickle of blood made its way across the cracked asphalt. He felt nothing, no regret, no satisfaction, just a strange emptiness that had been his companion for years. He tucked the gun into his waistband, glanced around to confirm no witnesses, and walked unhurriedly to his truck. As Ray drove away, he thought about stopping for coffee. It was still early, after all. In the days that followed, Millfield buzzed with the news of Marcus Walsh's murder. The police investigation moved quickly. The liquor store's security camera had captured everything. Ray made no attempt to flee. They found him at his apartment, sitting calmly at his kitchen table. "I've been expecting you," he told the officers who came to arrest him. The weeks leading up to the trial passed in a blur of fluorescent lights and institutional food. Ray's court-appointed attorney, a harried middle-aged woman named Ms. Patel, visited him 3 times. During their final meeting, she slid a document across the table. "The DA is offering 25 years with possibility of parole after 15, she said. "Given the circumstances and the evidence against you, it's a generous offer." Ray pushed the paper back without reading it. "No, Mr. Garner, they have you on video. The case is open and shut. If you go to trial, you're looking at life without parole." "I'm not denying what I did," Ray said. "I just want my day in court." Miss Patel sighed, removing her glasses to rub the bridge of her nose. "This isn't about vindication, Ray. The courtroom isn't going to give you what you're looking for." "And what am I looking for?" "Justification. You want the world to understand why you did it. But that's not how the system works." Ray stared at her, his face impassive. "Then the system's broken." "That may be," she conceded, "but it's the only one we've got." The next day, Ray dismissed Miss Patel and chose to represent himself, despite the judge's warnings about the foolishness of such a decision. The trial was brief, lasting only 3 days. The prosecution presented the security footage, the murder weapon found in Ray's apartment, and testimony from patrons at the Rusty Nail about the altercation the night before. When Ray took the stand in his own defense, the prosecutor asked him directly, "Why did you kill Marcus Walsh?" Ray's answer was simple: he deserved it. No further questions were asked. The jury took less than 2 hours to find him guilty of first-degree murder. At his sentencing hearing, a week later, the courtroom was packed. Several news outlets covered the story: the local man who executed one of the town's most prominent businessmen in broad daylight. Marcus's widow sat in the front row, flanked by their 2 adult children. Her face was a mask of dignified grief. The judge, a severe woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair, asked if Ray had anything to say for himself before she passed sentence. Ray stood, chains rattling around his wrists and ankles. People talk about justice like it's some kind of balance sheet. Like if you do enough good, it cancels out the bad. But that's not how the world works. Some people take and take and take, and they never face consequences. They hide behind lawyers and money and respectability. He looked around the courtroom, meeting the eyes of Marcus's family. "I'm not sorry he's dead. I'm just sorry it had to be me who did it." The judge sentenced him to life without possibility of parole. Ray's first night in prison was a symphony of unfamiliar sounds: metal doors clanging shut, distant conversations echoing off concrete walls, the steady breathing of his cellmate in the bunk below. He lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling where previous inmates had stuck photos and magazine cutouts, now yellowed with age. He should have felt something: fear, regret, anger, anything. Instead, there was only the same emptiness that had been with him when he pulled the trigger. The day had been a blur of processing fingerprints, photographs, body cavity searches, and orientation. They'd issued him khaki scrubs, a thin blanket, and basic toiletries. The other inmates had stared as he walked through the cell block, sizing him up. Ray had kept his gaze forward, his expression neutral. He'd learned long ago that showing weakness was an invitation for predators. His cellmate, a heavy-set man in his 50s with tattoos covering his arms, had merely grunted when Ray was assigned to the cell. "Top bunk's yours?" he'd said, not looking up from his paperback novel. "I snore. Deal with it." Now, as the lights dimmed for the night, Ray realized with a sudden clarity that he hadn't felt anything real since the day his father died. Everything since then had been shadows and echoes. The murder hadn't filled the void. It had only confirmed its existence. He'd been walking around like a ghost for years, going through the motions of living without actually feeling alive. The irony wasn't lost on him. Marcus Walsh would continue to shape Millfield through his developments and investments. The projects he'd started would be completed, bearing his name on gleaming plaques. His vision for the town would live on through his business partners and family. Meanwhile, Ray would rot in this cell, forgotten by everyone except as a cautionary tale. The man who thought he could balance the scales of justice with a bullet. In seeking justice for his father, Ray had only succeeded in erasing himself. But even knowing this, he couldn't bring himself to regret his actions. In a life defined by powerlessness, he had seized control for one brutal moment. That night, as he drifted toward sleep, Ray thought he heard his father's voice. "This isn't what I wanted for you, son." But the voice faded, replaced by the sounds of the prison metal doors closing, guards' footsteps, distant conversations. Ray closed his eyes. Outside these walls, the world continued its relentless march forward. Towns changed, businesses rose and fell, people lived and died, and none of it would ever touch him again. In his search for justice, Ray had found only its cold, empty shadow, and in that darkness, he would remain. 6 months into his sentence, Ray received his first and only visitor. Betty from the bank, the same Betty that Marcus had mentioned in the parking lot, sat across from him in the visitation room. She was in her 60s now, her hair completely gray and her hands spotted with age. "I thought you should have this," she said, sliding a yellowed envelope across the table. "I found it when they were clearing out the old bank files." Ray opened it cautiously. Inside was a letter dated 15 years earlier, written in his father's distinctive, cramped handwriting. It was addressed to Marcus Walsh. "Marcus, I've thought long and hard about your offer, and I can't accept it. Not because I don't think it's fair, it is, more than fair, but because Garner's isn't just a business to me. It's where my father taught me how to rebuild an engine. It's where I taught Ray how to change his first tire. It's where I've spent every day for the last 30 years. You see property and potential profits. I see memories and legacy. Maybe that makes me a fool in today's world. Maybe Ray will resent me someday for not setting him up with a cushion of money instead of a struggling business. But I have to believe some things are worth more than money. I wish you luck with your development. Just do it without my land. Sincerely, Raymond Garner Sr." Ray read the letter 3 times, his vision blurring. "Your father was a proud man," Betty said softly. "Too proud sometimes, but he loved you more than anything." "Why are you showing me this now?" Ray asked, his voice hoarse. "Because you should know the truth. Marcus did try to help your father, in his way, and your father made his choice for his own reasons." She hesitated. "And because Marcus wasn't entirely honest with you that day, after your father died, Marcus tried to give you the money directly, said he owed it to Raymond Sr. But you were so angry back then, he knew you wouldn't take it. So he set up a trust in your name." Ray stared at her. "What?" "There's money waiting for you, Ray. Not that it matters much now." Betty stood up. "I just thought you should know that things are rarely as simple as they seem. Neither Marcus nor your father were saints or sinners. Just men making choices they thought were right." After she left, Ray sat alone in his cell with the letter clutched in his hand. The emptiness inside him began to fill with something else, not regret, exactly, but a dawning comprehension of the tragedy he'd authored. In his blind pursuit of what he'd perceived as justice, he'd missed the complex truth of the situation. He'd reduced Marcus to a villain and his father to a victim, when the reality was far more nuanced. The realization didn't change anything. Marcus was still dead. Ray was still in prison. But for the first time since pulling the trigger, Ray felt something crack within his carefully constructed narrative of righteousness. That night, as the lights went out across the cell block, Ray wept for the first time since his father's funeral. He wept not just for his own wasted life, but for Marcus's family, for his father's memory that he'd tarnished, and for the complicated truth that his simple vengeance had obscured. In his search for justice, Ray had found only its cold, empty shadow. And in that darkness, despite this small flame of understanding, he would remain for the rest of his natural life, paying an infinite price for a moment of misguided retribution. If you liked the story, like the video and subscribe to the channel.